You don't belong here! You never did, and you never will!
Please, I'm begging you!
The thunder cracked like a whip as Mayo's belongings exploded onto the rain-drenched street. She fell forward, palms slamming against wet asphalt as her stepfather's voice boomed from the doorway above. You don't belong here. You never did, and you never will. Mayo's fingers scraped uselessly at the broken handle of her suitcase. Her deep brown skin slick with rain and the kind of tears that come from a lifetime of rejection finally reaching its breaking point. The door didn't just close. It slammed with the finality of a coffin lid, the sound vibrating through her ribs like a physical blow. 24 years. Her entire existence packed into a battered rolling suitcase that now lay split open in a puddle, her worn clothes floating in dirty water. Her mother hadn't even looked at her, just stood in the living room with her new family, the real family, and let her husband throw Mayo out like garbage. The woman who gave birth to her chose a stepdaughter's crocodile tears over her own flesh and blood. Okay, Mayo whispered through chattering teeth, grabbing the broken suitcase with both hands. If this is my story now, I'll write it myself. Wait, stop right here. What happens next is so twisted that if you're not subscribed, you'll lose this story forever in your feed. And you do not want to miss the moment Mayo life transformed into a powerful figure everyone admired. Hit that subscribe button now, smash the like, and comment where you're watching from. I read every single one. Because the girl crying in the rain right now, she's about to become more powerful than anyone expected. But only if you stay locked in. Now grab a glass of wine and relax, because this story is about to take a turn you never saw coming. Now let's dive in. 5 days. That's how long Mayo had been rotating between a public library during the day and a park bench at night, rationing a box of crackers she'd bought with her last $8 and pretending she had somewhere to go every time a security guard looked her way. The third dawn bled softly across the city skyline, the kind of pale light that doesn't promise warmth, just another day. Mayo stirred from the park bench where she had spent the night, her body stiff and her stomach hollow. The dampness of the grass had crept through her thin jacket hours ago, and now it clung to her skin like a reminder of everything she'd lost. The park was almost empty at this hour. Only a jogger in the distance and a man in a city maintenance truck emptying bins. She tried to stretch, to shake the cold out of her bones, but it stayed, deep and stubborn. She had been living like this for 2 nights now, ever since the last of her cash had disappeared and the cheap motel clerk had thrown her out without a glance. The first night she'd cried. The second, she'd stopped trying. Now she just existed, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Her backpack was her whole world. Inside, a change of clothes, a half-empty bottle of water, and a small packet of crackers she'd been saving. She looked at it, considered breaking the seal, then pushed it back down. You never know what tomorrow might bring, she told herself, though she didn't believe it. She started walking toward the small fountain near the park's center. That's when she saw him, a man sitting slouched on a nearby bench, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched in defeat. His clothes were torn and grimy, layers that looked like they had once belonged to someone else. A pair of worn sneakers dangled from his feet, the soles nearly gone. His hair was matted, and his beard looked like it had grown without permission. He could have been any of the nameless, wandering figures she'd seen these past days. But something about him, something quiet, still, made her pause. She might have kept walking, but he looked up. His eyes caught hers, and for a moment she forgot how tired she was. There was a steadiness in them, a kind of raw alertness that didn't match the rest of him. Then he spoke, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in days. "Hey," he said, "you got any water?" Mayo hesitated. The bottle in her bag was nearly empty, but the way he asked, it wasn't greedy or desperate, just, human. She took out the bottle and handed it to him. "It's not much," she said. He nodded in thanks, drank slowly, then passed it back with both hands, as though it were something sacred. "That's more than I've had all day." Mayo sat down at the far end of the bench. The morning breeze carried the smell of rain and exhaust. "Rough night?" she asked. He gave a short laugh, dry and humorless. "You could say that. Rough week. Rough life, maybe." He leaned back, looking at the fountain as though it might tell him something. "I'm Ryan." "Mayo," she said. He glanced at her, really looked this time. "You don't look like you belong out here." She smirked faintly. "Neither do you." That got another laugh from him, softer this time. He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to remember what warmth felt like. "Guess looks can lie." Mayo pulled out the small packet of crackers. She hesitated, then tore it open and held it out. "Here," she said. "It's not much." Ryan blinked, clearly surprised. "You sure?" "Yeah," she said. "I wasn't really hungry anyway." That was a lie, and they both knew it. He took a piece, chewed slowly. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I can manage." "I know," she said quietly. "But you asked for help." The words hung between them, fragile and true. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city was waking up now, cars rumbling in the distance, a bus hissing to a stop near the corner. The world was moving again, but here on this bench, it felt like time had stopped. Ryan turned the cracker over in his hand as though studying it. "You ever notice how people don't look at you when you're down?" he said. "Like, if they don't see you, maybe you don't exist." Mayo's throat tightened. "Yeah," she said. "They only see what they can fix, and when they can't, they walk away." He looked at her, eyes narrowing just a little. "You've been there." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The dark circles under her eyes, the frayed edges of her jacket, the tired way she held herself. They said enough. He nodded, as if confirming a thought. "You've still got that thing, though." "What thing?" "That look," he said. "Like you still believe something good might happen, even if it's just a tiny bit." She laughed softly. "You're reading too much into it." "Maybe," he said, shrugging. "But I notice things. Always have." He looked around the park, eyes darting to the people passing by. "Everyone's got a story. You can tell by how they move. That guy." He nodded toward a man in a suit walking briskly by. "He's late. Not for work, though. He's avoiding something. Maybe home." Mayo followed his gaze, watching the man disappear down the path. "You do this often?" "Guess people's stories?" "Used to," he said, "when I had people to talk to." She studied him for a moment. Beneath the grime and ragged clothes, there was something sharp about him. A presence, a mind that hadn't dulled. "What happened?" she asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Life. Wrong turns. Right ones, maybe, if you believe in lessons. Lost a job. Lost a house. Then lost the people who didn't know what to say anymore." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that kind of loss." For a while, they sat in silence. The world around them carried on, oblivious. Birds hopped near their feet, searching for crumbs. The fountain gurgled, steady and indifferent. Mayo found herself saying, "I used to think you had to hit rock bottom before you could start over, but no one tells you how long you might stay there." Ryan's mouth twitched. "Maybe that's the trick. Maybe starting over isn't about climbing out. Maybe it's about learning to breathe while you're still down here." She looked at him then, not at his clothes or his beard or the weariness, but at the calm beneath it all. He didn't look like someone who'd given up. He looked like someone who had been broken and was still, somehow, holding his pieces together. He caught her gaze and smiled faintly. "You're a good soul, Mayo. You don't hide it very well." She looked away, suddenly shy. "Good souls don't end up sleeping in parks." He tilted his head. "Maybe that's exactly where they end up, because no one else will sit on the bench." A breeze rustled through the trees. Mayo felt it lift her hair, cool against her face. For the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. There was something grounding in the presence of another person who understood, not out of pity, but recognition. She dug into her bag and found a granola bar she'd forgotten about. She broke it in half and handed him a piece. "Guess we're eating breakfast together," she said. Ryan smiled, a real one this time. "Guess we are." They ate in silence, and somehow it felt right. The city noise grew louder, the laughter of school children, the clatter of bikes. But the world felt smaller, closer. When she stood to leave, she didn't know where she was going. Ryan looked up, squinting in the morning light. "You heading somewhere?" "Nowhere in particular," she said. "Just forward." He nodded. "That's enough." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the last of her coins, barely enough for a sandwich. She pressed them into his hand. "You might need this more than me." He shook his head. "Keep it." "Please," she said. "Just this once, let me help." He studied her for a long moment, then took the coins. "You already did." As she walked away, she felt the faintest trace of warmth spreading through her chest, not from food or money, but from the simple act of being seen. She didn't know if she'd ever cross paths with Ryan again, but his voice followed her long after she left the park. "Don't lose that look," he'd said. She didn't plan to. The rain had eased into a fine mist that clung to the cracked windows of the community shelter, softening the edges of the city's noise outside. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and burnt coffee, a tired scent that settled over the folding chairs and worn blankets like a sigh. Mayo sat near the heater, her small duffel at her feet, trying not to think about how empty her stomach felt, or how long it had been since she'd had a proper bed. The hum of murmured conversation filled the room, snippets of stories, of survival, of people trying to hold on to the last shreds of dignity. Ryan had been volunteering there for months, quietly moving through the routines of handing out meals and blankets, fixing the broken latch on the bathroom door, and making sure the coffee never ran out. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention to himself. His clothes were clean but simple, his voice always calm, his presence steady in a room that often felt like it could fall apart at any moment. Mayo had noticed the way he looked at people, not with pity, but with a kind of gentle understanding, as if he recognized some invisible ache they all carried. That night, the shelter was fuller than usual. The cold had crept deeper into the city, pushing more people inside. Mayo was staring at her hands when Ryan approached, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use something warm," he said, offering one. His smile was small but genuine, the kind that reached his eyes. She took it, murmuring a thank you. The heat bled into her fingers, and for a moment she let herself feel the comfort of it. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't demand words. Then Ryan spoke softly, almost to himself. "Do you ever feel like you've been walking alone for too long?" Mayo glanced at him, unsure how to answer. "Every day," she said finally. He nodded, staring into his cup. "I used to think money could fill that space," he said. "But it doesn't. It just makes the silence louder." She wasn't sure what to make of that. He didn't look like someone who'd ever had to worry about being cold or hungry. But there was something tired in his face, something that made her believe him. "I don't have much left that feels real," he continued. "No family, no one waiting when I go home. I thought maybe that's just how life was supposed to be, but lately, I don't know. Maybe I just don't want to be alone anymore. Mayo felt a lump form in her throat. Loneliness was something she understood too well. It was a constant companion, a shadow that followed even in crowded rooms. She took a sip of the coffee and tried to swallow the ache. "It's hard," she said, trying to keep going when there's no one to care if you stop. Ryan turned toward her, his gaze steady. "What if we didn't have to do it alone?" The words hung in the air between them, fragile and impossible. She frowned, uncertain if she'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It sounds crazy, I know, but I've been thinking about it for weeks. You're kind, you listen, and I trust you, Mayo. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I want something different, something human. I want someone to share the quiet with." Her heart stumbled in her chest. "Ryan, I'm serious," he said. "I'm asking you to marry me." For a long moment, all she could do was stare at him. The sounds of the shelter faded, the laughter, the coughing, the shuffle of blankets, and all that remained was the thud of her heartbeat. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he said softly. "I know you've got a good heart. I know you're tired, same as me. Maybe that's enough to start with." It was absurd, impossible. She had nothing, no home, no job, no stability. He could have chosen anyone, someone from his world, someone who didn't sleep in borrowed blankets. But he was looking at her like she mattered, like she wasn't just another forgotten face in a shelter bed. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice breaking. He smiled faintly. "Because you don't look at me like I'm someone to be impressed by. You just see me." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe because I see you too." Mayo looked down at her coffee. The warmth had faded. She thought of the cold waiting outside, of the long night she'd face once the shelter closed in the morning. A proposal, marriage, felt like something out of a dream she didn't deserve. But the way he said it didn't sound like a rescue. It sounded like two people reaching for something they'd both lost. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "Just think about it." But she didn't need to think long. That night, when the lights dimmed and the volunteers began cleaning up, she found Ryan near the door, putting away the last of the cups. "If you still mean it," she said quietly, "then yes." He froze, the words sinking in. Then a slow, astonished smile spread across his face. "You mean it?" She nodded. "I'm tired of being alone too." The next morning was gray and cold, the kind of morning that made the city feel suspended in silence. They walked together to the courthouse, her duffel slung over her shoulder, his jacket draped over her to block the wind. The shelter residents had gathered to see them off, some cheering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But there was warmth in their eyes, a flicker of hope that maybe something good could still happen in a place like this. The courthouse clerk barely looked up when they arrived, just slid 2 forms across the counter. The paperwork was quick, the vows simple. No music, no flowers, no guests beyond the handful of people from the shelter who had followed them inside. Mayo's hands trembled as she signed her name, and Ryan's fingers brushed hers as he took the pen next. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, they both let out a breath that felt like the first one they'd taken in years. Outside, the mist had turned to sunlight breaking through the clouds. They stood on the courthouse steps, unsure what came next. Ryan turned to her, his expression soft, almost boyish. "Guess we're married," he said. Mayo laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. It felt strange and light, like something cracking open inside her. Guess we are, she said. He reached for her hand. I don't know where this goes, he admitted, but I promise I won't let you walk alone anymore. She squeezed his fingers, her heart unsteady but warm. The city stretched out before them, messy, uncertain, full of sharp edges, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lost in it. They started walking, side by side, their steps slow, unsure, but together. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew that what had begun as desperation might, just might, become something more. Something fragile and real, built not from wealth or promises, but from the simple human need to be seen, to be held, to belong. The apartment wasn't what Mayo expected. When Ryan said a friend's place, she pictured a cramped studio, maybe a futon on the floor and some mismatched furniture. But this one, tucked in a quiet residential building just off the main street, was clean, spacious, and tastefully done, the kind of place that looked like someone actually lived there, not like it was borrowed for a few nights. The couch was soft leather, the coffee table glass and chrome. A faint scent of sandalwood hung in the air, like incense burned often but carefully. Ryan dropped his duffel by the door, running a hand through his hair as though he was relieved to be back. Make yourself at home, he said, his tone too casual, too quick. My friend won't mind. Mayo hesitated before stepping in, scanning the space. The walls held a few framed photos, cityscapes, not portraits, but the style felt coherent, almost curated. Whoever owned the place had taste. She noticed a pair of men's shoes neatly lined up by the door, larger than Ryan's size. Your friend lives here alone? She asked. He gave a brief nod. Yeah, he travels a lot. She tried to smile, to believe him. After all, she was in no position to ask questions. Her backpack was all she had left, and Ryan had been the only one who didn't treat her like an inconvenience since the night everything fell apart. Still, there was something about the way he avoided her eyes that made her chest tighten. He busied himself in the kitchen, pulling out bottles of water and setting one in front of her. I'll get us some food later. Just rest for now. She sank into the couch, exhaustion settling into her bones. The day had been too long, too many explanations she couldn't give, too many things she didn't understand. Yet, as she looked around, small details kept tugging at her attention. The faint hum of an air purifier, the pristine arrangement of books on the shelf, the subtle smell of coffee that felt freshly made, not stale. Whoever this friend was, he had left in a hurry, but not without care. Ryan's phone buzzed and his hand shot to his pocket faster than seemed natural. He turned away from her as he answered, speaking in low, clipped Korean. She understood only fragments, words she half remembered from her time in Seoul, but the tone was unmistakably sharp. A report, maybe. A request. When he hung up, his expression smoothed over so quickly it felt rehearsed. Work? She asked lightly. Just a friend checking in, he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nothing important. She nodded, pretending not to notice how his shoulders hadn't relaxed. Later, while Ryan showered, Mayo wandered to the bookshelf. There was a row of art books, mostly Korean contemporary painters, alongside novels in both English and Hangul. She ran her fingers across the spines, tracing names she couldn't read. One of the shelves held a small wooden box with a brass clasp, ornate, like something old and personal. She didn't open it, but the temptation lingered. When he came out, towel slung around his neck, she quickly sat back down, pretending to scroll through her phone. Find something interesting? He asked. Just books. Your friend has good taste. He smiled again, this time more genuinely. Yeah, he does. Then, after a pause, he won't be back for a while, so don't worry about that. She wanted to believe him, but the phrasing stuck with her. He won't be back for a while. Not he's away or he's traveling. Just a quiet assertion that sounded like something he needed her to accept. Dinner came in the form of takeout. Hot soup, rice, and side dishes from a nearby Korean restaurant. Ryan set the table like he'd done it 100 times, even knew where to find the chopsticks without looking. When she raised an eyebrow, he just shrugged. "I've been here before." "You mean while your friend was gone?" He didn't answer right away. "Yeah," he said finally. "Something like that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward exactly, but heavy. She ate slowly, watching him between bites. He was careful with his words, careful with everything. Even his laughter, soft and occasional, sounded like something practiced, as if he'd learned it from someone else. After dinner, she offered to wash the dishes, but he waved her off. "You're a guest," he said, taking them himself. As he moved around the kitchen, she noticed again the expensive watch on his wrist. It gleamed under the warm light, the brand name subtle but unmistakable. "That's new," she said, trying to sound teasing. "Did your mysterious friend give you that too?" He froze for half a second, then turned with an easy grin. "Actually, yeah, a gift. I don't even wear it much." But he didn't take it off. The rest of the evening passed quietly. She curled up on the couch while he scrolled through messages, sometimes typing quickly, sometimes staring at the screen too long. Every few minutes, his phone vibrated. Each time, he excused himself and stepped into the hallway, speaking softly in that same clipped tone. Mayo couldn't tell if it was her exhaustion or intuition, but something about all of it felt off. Not dangerous, exactly, but constructed, like a stage set built to look real. By midnight, he offered her the bedroom. "I'll take the couch," he said when she protested. "You need rest more than I do." She didn't argue. The bed smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen, and the sheets were cool against her skin. But sleep didn't come easily. She kept hearing his voice from the other room, muffled and low, the rhythm of Korean words she couldn't follow. At one point, curiosity pushed her up. She padded to the door and cracked it open just enough to see him standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, staring out into the dark. His reflection in the glass looked almost unfamiliar, his posture rigid, his expression stripped of the easy warmth he showed her. He hung up after a while, let out a slow breath, then rubbed his face like someone carrying too much. For a moment she thought she saw something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or doubt. But then he turned off the lights and lay down. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds. Ryan was already dressed, coffee brewing in the kitchen. He looked composed, almost cheerful. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded, even though she hadn't. "You?" "Always." He poured her a cup, handed it over with steady hands. She caught herself watching him again, the precision of his movements, the ease that wasn't quite ease. Every gesture seemed measured, like he was performing calm. When he left to take another call, she glanced at the counter and saw his wallet lying there. A small, embossed card peeked from the fold, written in Korean script. She couldn't read it, but the logo at the top, a gold crest, official looking, gave her pause. She didn't touch it, only stared until guilt forced her to look away. By the time he came back, the wallet was gone. That afternoon he suggested they go out, just for some air. They walked through the neighborhood, small shops and quiet streets lined with ginkgo trees. People greeted him, shopkeepers, an elderly man at a newspaper stand, even a delivery driver who bowed slightly as they passed. Each time, Ryan nodded back, polite but distant. "You know a lot of people around here," she said. "Yeah," he replied, too quickly. "I've been around." It wasn't until they stopped for coffee that she caught it, the way the barista handed him his drink without asking his order, the way she smiled a little too deferentially. Ryan slipped a few bills into the tip jar, but the barista barely looked at them. Her eyes followed him as if waiting for permission to breathe. When they stepped back outside, Mayo couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ryan," she said quietly, "who are you really?" He stopped walking, just for a heartbeat. Then he smiled again, that same practiced ease. "I told you, just someone trying to help." But this time she saw the crack in it, the smallest hesitation, like a flicker of light behind a curtain. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As they walked on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just seen something she wasn't supposed to. Something that explained the watch, the apartment, the phone calls, and though she didn't know what it was yet, she knew one thing for certain. Ryan wasn't who he said he was. When Soo-jin first appeared at the door, Mayo thought she had the wrong apartment. The woman looked like she had stepped straight out of a magazine, tall, poised, her dark hair sleekly tied back, her clothes whispering luxury in that quiet way expensive things often do. She smiled easily, but her eyes flickered with calculation, the kind that measured and assessed without seeming to. "You must be Mayo," she said in lightly accented English, her tone friendly but deliberate. "I'm Soo-jin, Ryan's cousin. He told me to come help you get settled." Mayo hesitated. Ryan had never mentioned a cousin. Not once, not even in passing. But she remembered how, the night before, he'd said something about making sure she had everything she needed. Maybe this was what he meant. Soo-jin didn't wait for permission. She stepped inside, scanning the small apartment with a faint, approving nod, as though it met some invisible standard. "You've been through a lot," she said gently. "Ryan thought it would be good for you to get out a bit. A change of clothes, maybe? Something that feels more like you." The words landed softly, but they carried an odd weight. Mayo wasn't sure what "like her" even meant anymore. Still, she found herself agreeing, almost out of politeness, and within minutes, Soo-jin had ushered her out the door, down to a sleek black car waiting by the curb. The driver opened the door for them, and Soo-jin smiled at Mayo as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. "You'll see," she said. "It's nice to treat yourself once in a while." The city seemed different from the car window, cleaner, sharper, almost unreal. Mayo watched the people rushing along the sidewalks, the glass fronts of boutiques reflecting the soft winter light, and for a moment she wondered how any of this connected to her life. She wasn't used to being driven anywhere. The car hummed quietly, and Soo-jin's perfume filled the air, a scent both floral and metallic, like something crafted rather than grown. Their first stop was a store with no visible name, just a gleaming door that opened with a gentle chime. Inside, the space was bright and silent, except for the low murmur of polite greetings. Everything looked too perfect to touch. The fabrics, the displays, even the air itself. Mayo glanced down at her sneakers, her jeans, suddenly aware of every crease and thread. "Are you sure this is the right place?" she whispered. Soo-jin smiled as if the question were sweetly naive. "Ryan wanted you to have the best. Don't worry about the prices." That sentence lingered like perfume. The best. Don't worry. Words Mayo had never heard applied to her before. A saleswoman appeared almost instantly, addressing Soo-jin in Korean before turning to Mayo with a professional smile. "Would you like to try some things on?" she asked, her tone both welcoming and expectant. Soo-jin nodded approvingly and began selecting items without hesitation. Soft sweaters in pale shades, dresses that shimmered faintly when they moved, coats that looked heavy but felt like air. Mayo trailed behind, feeling as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. Each piece she tried on transformed her a little more. The mirror reflected a version of herself that didn't look lost or uncertain. She looked composed, beautiful even. "See?" Sujin said, tilting her head. You just needed the right frame. Mayo smiled, though uneasily. This is too much. I can't afford any of this. Ryan's already taken care of it. Sujin replied smoothly, waving off the concern. He has friends who owe him favors. It's nothing. That explanation didn't sit right. Ryan, with his quiet apartment and half-finished takeout containers, had never seemed like the kind of man surrounded by wealthy friends. But Sujin's confidence was disarming, her words quick and reassuring. Whenever Mayo tried to ask more about Ryan's friends, or why any of them would owe him anything, Sujin deflected gracefully, turning the conversation toward something else. A new fabric, a different color, the way a certain cut of dress softened her edges. By the time they left the first store, several sleek shopping bags hung from Sujin's arm, all in subtle shades of ivory and gray. They went to another shop, and then another, each one more exclusive than the last. Somewhere between the third and fourth, Mayo stopped trying to protest. The rhythm of it, the soft light, the gentle hands of attendants adjusting a collar or fastening a clasp, Sujin's approving nods, lulled her into a strange calm. Still, the unease lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. She noticed how the sales staff deferred to Sujin, how the receipts were always tucked discreetly into envelopes and handed to her, not Mayo. She noticed the way Sujin's phone kept lighting up with messages she didn't check, and how every now and then she'd glance at Mayo with a small, assessing smile, as if measuring the progress of something unseen. At one boutique, while Mayo was changing, she overheard Sujin speaking in a low voice near the counter. The tone was polite but firm, the kind of voice used when asserting authority. She caught fragments. Yes, it's already approved. No, she doesn't need to sign anything. Just send it directly. When Sujin noticed her returning, her smile reappeared, seamless and bright. All set, she said. Let's get you something warm for the evening. By the time they stopped for lunch, Mayo's head was spinning. They sat at a quiet restaurant tucked into a narrow side street, where the waiter greeted Sujin by name and poured wine without asking. Mayo watched her across the table, wondering how someone like this could possibly be related to Ryan. So, how long have you known him? She asked finally. Sujin paused, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Since we were children, she said easily. Our families were close. But he never mentioned you. She smiled again, unbothered. Ryan doesn't mention much, does he? He's private. Always has been. She leaned forward slightly. But he cares about you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. There was something in the way she said it that made Mayo's pulse quicken, half reassurance, half warning. They walked for a while after lunch, the weight of the bags tugging gently at Mayo's arms. The city seemed softer now, the air filled with faint music spilling from open doors. Sujin talked as they walked, telling stories about Ryan's past, the business ventures he'd tried, the people he'd helped. Her voice was warm, convincing, but the stories felt polished, rehearsed, too neat around the edges. He has friends in high places, Sujin said, as if reading Mayo's doubt. People who owe him favors, yes, but also people who respect him. You'll see, in time. Mayo wanted to believe her. She wanted to think there was a simple explanation for all this, that Ryan's generosity was just another mystery she'd yet to understand. But as they returned to the car, her reflection in the window caught her by surprise. The woman staring back looked nothing like the one who had woken up that morning. Her hair was neatly styled, her clothes soft and new, her posture straighter. Yet beneath that polished surface, a flicker of uncertainty remained. When they reached the apartment, Sujin helped carry the bags inside, placing each one carefully on the bed. Try everything on again later, she said. Get used to how it feels. Ryan wants you comfortable. Mayo nodded, murmuring thanks, but her voice felt distant in her own ears. As Sujin turned to leave, she paused by the door. "One more thing," she said lightly. "If anyone asks, you can just tell them I'm family. It's simpler that way." The words lingered long after the door clicked shut. Family. The word felt strange on her tongue. She looked at the mountain of bags, the delicate fabric spilling out, the unfamiliar scent of luxury filling the air. Somewhere, deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Of what, she couldn't yet say. But she could feel it. The quiet hum of change. The pull of something larger than she could see. The transformation had begun, and whether she wanted it or not, she was already part of it. Mayo was folding laundry when the phone rang. Ryan's phone, forgotten on the coffee table. He'd stepped out to grab takeout, and she hesitated only a second before answering. "Hello?" A smooth male voice spilled through the line. "Chairman Kong, the board is waiting for your confirmation." Mayo blinked, momentarily certain she'd misheard. "Sorry, who?" But the man on the other end had already realized his mistake. A click, and the call went dead. The name reverberated in her head like a struck bell. Chairman Kong. She stared at the phone, Ryan's phone, the cracked screen lighting up once more before going dark. She replayed the last few weeks in her mind, the way he'd avoid certain topics, the evasive way he'd speak about money, the expensive watch he claimed was a knockoff from a street vendor. Every detail that once seemed like a harmless quirk now felt like a carefully placed curtain. When he came home, smiling, hands full of takeout, she watched him too closely. "Everything okay?" he asked, catching her stare. Mayo forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He nodded, unaware of the storm swirling behind her calm. That night, when he fell asleep, she sat in the dark beside him, scrolling through the name she'd heard. Chairman Kong. It took her less than a minute to find him, the billionaire CEO of Kong Group, a man whose photos filled entire news archives. His hair was slicked back in the pictures, his posture sharp, his suits tailored to command. But his eyes, those were Ryan's eyes. Her chest tightened. The man sleeping beside her had built empires, and yet he'd spent the past months fixing her sink, cooking noodles, pretending to struggle with rent. Who was he, really? The next evening, she followed him. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't not know. Ryan had told her he was heading to a quick meeting with a friend, but his route was anything but casual. He hailed a black sedan, sleek, tinted windows, and she caught another cab, telling the driver to keep distance. The city glowed in fractured reflections on the wet asphalt, street lights bending over puddles like tired sentinels. They drove for nearly half an hour before his car stopped in front of a glass tower that sliced the night sky in half. The Kong Group logo gleamed from the building's face like a secret shouting to be known. Mayo's breath caught. She sank lower in her seat as Ryan stepped out, his posture instantly different, upright, assured, commanding. He spoke to a man in a suit, and suddenly, bodyguards emerged from the shadows, opening doors, bowing slightly as he passed. Every trace of the quiet, self-effacing man she knew had vanished. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone who belonged to another world. Her stomach twisted. She didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or scream. When he disappeared through the revolving doors, she sat frozen, her heart thudding in disbelief. He came home past midnight, still smelling faintly of cologne and expensive whiskey. She was waiting in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't sipped. "How was your meeting?" she asked, her voice so steady it frightened even her. He paused. "Fine. Just business stuff." "You mean chairman stuff?" The words dropped between them like a grenade. Ryan froze, his expression unreadable. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Her voice cracked now, Chairman Kong. That's who you really are, isn't it?" Silence. Then, softly, he exhaled and sat down across from her, like a man laying down his weapons. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." She stared at him, the man she'd shared ramen with, the man who'd laughed until he cried watching bad TV. "So, what's the truth? That the guy fixing leaky pipes and splitting bills with me is actually a billionaire playing poor?" He winced. "I wasn't playing." "Then what do you call it?" He met her eyes, and for the first time the mask slipped, not the one that hid his wealth, but the one that hid his fear. "I needed to disappear for a while," he said quietly. "I'd built everything. Companies, networks, walls. People didn't see me anymore. They saw what I could give them. Investors, lovers, even friends. Every conversation had a price tag. I didn't know who I was without it." "And so you lied?" "I survived," he said. "I just wanted something real. Someone real." Her throat tightened. "So I was an experiment?" He shook his head quickly. "No, you were the only part that wasn't." Mayo stood, pacing, her mind running circles. "Do you know how humiliating this feels? I've been worrying about rent, about groceries, while you—" "I didn't want to buy you," he interrupted, voice breaking. "I wanted to earn you. If I'd told you who I was, would you have stayed? Would you have seen me?" She looked at him, and the ache in his voice tangled with her own confusion. She wanted to scream that she would have cared for him no matter what. But even she wasn't sure that was true. The truth had a cruel clarity. She might not have let him in if she'd known his name first. The night stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Ryan rose. "I'll go," he said softly. "You deserve honesty. I can't undo what I hid, but I can stop lying." She didn't stop him. The door closed with a sound that felt too final. In the days that followed, Mayo tried to make sense of it all. News headlines about Kong Group blurred on her screen. "Chairman returns from sabbatical," one read. Photos of him in sharp suits surrounded by cameras replaced the image of him stirring noodles in her kitchen. The distance between those worlds felt impossible to bridge, and yet she couldn't unsee the man who'd knelt on her floor fixing a broken chair. She couldn't unhear the way he'd laughed when she called him dramatic for burning toast. One evening, a black car pulled up outside her building. She watched from the window as Ryan stepped out. No bodyguards this time. No suits. Just him. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of everything that once made him untouchable. She opened the door before he could knock. Neither spoke at first. The air between them was fragile, balanced on what might come next. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I needed you to know the person you met, the life we had, it wasn't fake. The money, the company, that's the mask. This is the part I can't let go of." Mayo looked at him, trying to see where the two halves met, the billionaire and the man who'd fallen asleep on her couch mid-movie. "You could have told me," she whispered. "I was afraid you'd stop looking at me the way you did." His voice trembled. "Like I was enough." She swallowed hard, every word lodged in her throat. "You weren't supposed to need me to see that." He nodded, a small, broken smile forming. "I know." For a long moment, they simply stood there, two people suspended between truth and memory. The city outside hummed, indifferent. He turned to leave, but she caught his hand. Just for a second. Enough for him to look back, eyes searching hers. "Don't disappear again," she said quietly. "I won't," he promised. When the door closed behind him, Mayo didn't know what would happen next, whether forgiveness would grow in the cracks, or whether it would all collapse under the weight of what had been hidden. But as she looked at the empty chair he'd once fixed, she realized that love, real love, wasn't about the world someone owned. It was about the version of them that showed up when no one else was watching. And maybe, just maybe, that was the part of him she could still believe in. Jin-Ho Kong arrived unannounced, the way storms do, without warning but impossible to ignore once they hit. He stepped out of the black sedan in front of Mayo's apartment just as the first hints of dusk began to paint the city in bruised purples and copper light. He looked nothing like Ryan, at least not in the ways that mattered. Where Ryan's charm was effortless and unguarded, Jin-Ho's was deliberate, like a knife polished to a mirror shine. His suit was too perfect, his smile too calculated, and his eyes, those eyes were the same as Ryan's, but colder. Mayo had seen photos of him before, at company events, on glossy magazine pages, but standing in front of him now was different. The air around him seemed to shift, tight with quiet authority, as if he carried invisible weight wherever he went. He didn't shake her hand. He simply inclined his head slightly, his voice low and smooth as he said, "So you're the woman who made my brother careless." Inside, he didn't sit until she did. He looked around her modest apartment with a gaze that missed nothing. The faint scent of Ryan's cologne on a blanket, the photo of them by the window, the untouched cup of coffee still steaming beside her laptop. When he finally spoke again, it wasn't small talk. "Ryan didn't tell you much about the family, did he?" Mayo hesitated. "He told me enough," she said, though she knew it wasn't true. Ryan had been careful with his words when it came to his family. There were things he brushed off, moments where shadows crossed his face and he changed the subject. "I know the Kongs are powerful," she added softly, "but I didn't think—" "That were criminals?" Jin-Ho finished for her, his mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We prefer the term businessmen, but yes, the rumors are true to an extent. The Kong name doesn't just sit on legal papers. It sits in ledgers people don't get to see, in accounts that don't exist, and in the quiet spaces where fear does most of the work." He leaned back, eyes fixed on her. "My father built an empire out of nothing but debt and ambition. When you build that way, you owe people things, favors, loyalty, silence. We learned early that law and crime are sometimes the same coin, just different faces, and we learned to make both work for us." Mayo tried to keep her voice steady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're part of it now." His tone softened slightly, but it didn't make her feel safer. "Marrying Ryan means you carry our name. That makes you both valuable and vulnerable. The people who want to hurt us will use you to do it. The people who envy us will watch for any weakness you show. The people who owe us will measure how you stand beside us." She swallowed hard, her mind spinning. "I didn't ask for this." "None of us do," Jin-Ho said quietly. "We're born into it, or we're pulled in by love or greed or something that feels like fate. But once you're in, there's no walking away. You can pretend you don't see it, but that only works until someone decides you're useful." He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. "Do you know how many people Ryan has protected from this life? He wanted something clean, something that didn't carry our father's shadow. I let him believe that was possible because I wanted to see if he could do it." His reflection in the glass looked almost weary. "But he can't. Not anymore. And neither can you." Mayo felt something cold bloom in her chest. "Are you threatening me?" Jin-Ho turned back to her, and for the first time, there was no hardness in his expression, only an unnerving kind of sincerity. "No, I'm warning you. There's a difference. If I wanted to threaten you, you'd already know." He walked closer until he was standing right in front of her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You love my brother. That makes you a liability to people who want to control him. They'll come for you before they come for him. I need you to understand that." Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. "What do you expect me to do? Leave him?" A brief flicker of emotion crossed his face, something that looked like pity. "If you could, I'd tell you to. But I've seen the way Ryan looks at you. He's already chosen his side, and that means you're already in the war." He took out a small envelope and placed it on the table. "Inside are names, places, phone numbers, people who owe me favors. If something happens, you use one of those names. They'll get you out, quietly." He hesitated, then added, "But if you use it, you don't come back." Mayo stared at the envelope as if it were alive. "You make it sound like I'm already marked." Jinho's gaze didn't waver. "You are. The moment Ryan put a ring on your finger, they started watching. Our enemies don't forgive, and they don't forget. You'll learn to check your rearview mirror without thinking. You'll learn to read silence. You'll learn what fear sounds like when it's polite." A silence settled between them, heavy and sharp. The city hummed faintly outside, distant sirens blending with the sound of traffic. Jinho straightened his jacket, all business again. "Ryan doesn't know I came here," he said finally. "He'd hate that I'm involving you, but you needed to hear this from someone who understands what you've stepped into." As he reached for the door, Mayo found her voice again. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. He paused, hand on the handle. "Every day," he said without turning around. "But regret doesn't buy peace, and it doesn't bring anyone back." Then he looked over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Take care of my brother. He's the only good thing we ever did." When the door closed behind him, Mayo sank into her chair, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like ash. The city lights blinked through the window, indifferent, endless. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, neatly typed on expensive paper, were names she didn't recognize and numbers that felt like secrets. Ryan came home later that night, his laughter echoing down the hallway before he saw her face. The moment he did, his smile faltered. "What happened?" She hesitated, the envelope burning like a brand in her hand. "Your brother was here." Ryan froze. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. Then his jaw clenched, and something dark flickered in his eyes. "What did he say?" "Enough," she whispered. "He told me what your family really is." Ryan looked away, shoulders rigid. "I wanted to keep you away from that world." "It's too late for that," she said softly. "He says I'm already part of it." Ryan closed his eyes, a long breath leaving him as if something inside him broke. When he finally looked at her again, there was no more hiding. "Then we'll face it together." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe love could stand against the kind of darkness Jinho had described. But as she looked at Ryan, his eyes tired, his smile forced, she understood the truth. Love didn't erase danger. It only made it hurt more when it found you. Outside, somewhere far below, a car door slammed, and a shadow moved across the street. Mayo reached for Ryan's hand, her pulse loud in her ears. For the first time, she realized that what Jinho had said was true. There was no walking away. There was only learning to live with the fear, to breathe through it, to love through it. And in that moment, as the night settled around them, she felt the invisible threads tighten. The web of power, loyalty, and danger that came with the Kong name. She was part of it now, whether she wanted it or not. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, embossed with the gold insignia of the Kong group, a lion encircled by laurel leaves. Mayo turned it over in her hands again and again, unable to ignore the weight of it or the pit in her stomach. The gala was to be held at the Kong family's private ballroom, a place she had only ever glimpsed from passing car windows and glossy magazine spreads. Now she was expected to walk through its grand doors on Ryan's arm as his wife. The thought alone made her palms damp. She had spent the entire week under the watchful eye of stylists sent by Mrs. Kong, hairdressers, makeup artists, a team of designers, each one picking, pinning, and perfecting until she barely recognized herself. By the time the last clasp on her gown was fastened, she no longer looked like the girl who once shared instant noodles with Ryan in a cramped apartment. In the mirror stood a woman wrapped in champagne silk, her collarbones dusted with gold shimmer, her lips the color of ripe berries. Beautiful, yes, but fragile, as if one wrong move might reveal the imposter beneath. Ryan appeared in the doorway just as she was adjusting one of her earrings. His black tuxedo fit him with the precision of a man who belonged to this world. For a moment she saw again the distance between them, the legacy that shaped him, the empire waiting on his shoulders. Then his expression softened. "You look perfect," he said quietly. "I look terrified," she admitted. He smiled, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. "That's because you know what they're like." The car ride to the gala felt endless. Through the tinted windows, the city glowed in ribbons of gold and white. Mayo's reflection flickered faintly against the glass, half in the present, half in memory. She remembered the first time Ryan had taken her hand in public, how certain he'd been, how unaware she was of what it truly meant to be seen with him. Tonight, there would be no hiding. The Kong ballroom was a cathedral of glass and marble, glittering beneath a cascade of chandeliers. Laughter floated through the air like perfume, light and practiced. Everywhere she looked were faces that seemed carved from the same cool marble. Socialites, politicians, heirs, and heiresses, all mingling as though they had been born knowing how to move through these rooms. Ryan guided her forward, a steady presence at her side. Conversations paused as they passed. People looked, then looked again, whispers trailing in their wake. Mayo caught fragments. The wife. Not from our circle. How daring of him. Each word pressed against her like the brush of cold silk. It wasn't long before they found her. Yuna. She was impossible to miss. Tall, poised, her gown a whisper of silver that caught every glint of light. The air seemed to cool around her as she turned, her eyes landing on Ryan first, then sliding toward Mayo with a faint, unreadable smile. "Ryan," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "It's been a long time." "Yuna," he acknowledged, his tone neutral but firm. "This is my wife, Mayo." The words struck the air like a chord. A hush, imperceptible but real, rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Mayo forced a polite smile, extending her hand. Yuna regarded it for a heartbeat too long before taking it lightly, as though she were touching something delicate and disposable. "Of course," Yuna said finally. "We've all heard so much about you." Mayo could hear the unspoken sentence beneath it. "We've all wondered how you got here." Ryan's arm tightened slightly around her waist, an invisible shield, but the damage had been done. Yuna's gaze lingered, cool, assessing, pitying, and then she excused herself, her silver dress gliding across the marble like smoke. For the rest of the evening, Mayo felt the stares. They came wrapped in smiles, sugar-coated with politeness, but their edges were sharp. People approached her with practiced curiosity, compliments that weren't compliments, questions that were traps. "Where did you study? How did you two meet? Such a surprise, isn't it, that Ryan married so quietly?" Each inquiry was an invitation to stumble. Ryan stood beside her, answering when he had to, but he let her face them. Maybe it was his way of letting the world know she wasn't a secret to be shielded, but a choice he would defend. Still, her pulse thrummed painfully with every encounter. At one point, she escaped to the balcony for air. The night was cool, the city lights trembling below like a field of stars. She leaned on the railing, closing her eyes for a moment. Inside, the laughter continued, muffled and distant. "You shouldn't let them see you falter." She opened her eyes. Yuna stood a few feet away, her expression calm, almost kind. "I'm not faltering," Mayo said. Yuna smiled faintly. "You're brave then, but bravery isn't enough in this world. They'll never forgive you for taking what they believe was meant for one of their own." Mayo looked at her, trying to find the woman behind the perfect facade. "And what do you believe?" "I believe," Yuna said softly, "that you have no idea what you've stepped into." Before Mayo could answer, Ryan's voice cut through the night. "There you are." He approached with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to command attention. His gaze shifted briefly to Yuna. "Thank you for keeping my wife company." Yuna's eyes flickered, just once. "Always a pleasure, Ryan." And then she was gone, swallowed by the glittering sea of guests. Mayo turned to him. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said simply. "They needed to hear it." And they did. Later that evening, when a group of shareholders' wives began their quiet snickering at the edge of the dance floor, Ryan took Mayo's hand and led her into the center of the ballroom. The music slowed, the lights softened, and every gaze turned toward them. He pulled her close, his hand resting at the small of her back. "Let them see," he whispered. The orchestra swelled, and they moved together, awkward at first, then fluid, as if they had always known how to find each other in motion. The murmurs around them faded into the rhythm of the music. When the song ended, Ryan didn't release her hand. Instead, he turned to the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the hush. "For those still wondering," he said, his tone even but firm, "Mayo is my wife, my only wife, and anyone who respects me will respect her." It was not a declaration made for romance. It was a statement of power, delivered in the only language this room understood. The silence that followed was heavy, glittering, final. When the applause came, it was polite, restrained. But beneath the clinking of glasses and careful smiles, a new current stirred. The wives exchanged looks. The men leaned in closer to whisper. In that single moment, Mayo felt the shift. She had not just been seen, she had been marked. As the night wore on, she moved through the ballroom with her head high, the warmth of Ryan's words still burning in her chest. The cruelty no longer surprised her. It was almost predictable now, but what caught her off guard was her own resolve. For every glance that sought to diminish her, she found another reason to stand taller. When they finally left, the city was quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. In the car, Ryan reached for her hand. "You did well tonight," he said. Mayo looked out the window, watching their reflection fade into the dark. "It feels like the beginning of a war," she murmured. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll fight it together." And though she didn't say it aloud, she knew he was right. The battle had already begun. The whispers, the alliances, the polished smiles concealing knives. She had entered a world that thrived on beauty and power, where love was both a weapon and a weakness. But as the car pulled away from the glowing towers of the Kong estate, she caught her own reflection one last time. Still beautiful, still fragile, but no longer unsure. If this was fire, she thought, then let it burn. Under the silver hush of dawn, the Kong mansion stood quiet, its marble halls still soaked in the calm that came after long nights of chaos. Ryan had been awake for hours, pacing through his study, the faint hum of the city outside a reminder that peace was never more than an illusion. Mayo had fallen asleep on the couch hours ago, a book still open in her lap, her soft breaths the only thing that seemed untouched by the violence of the world he ruled. For a moment, Ryan let himself look at her, the tenderness that stirred in his chest feeling almost alien now. He turned away, poured another drink, and stared at the skyline. He didn't know that this would be the last quiet moment he'd have for a long time. The strike came with precision, planned, surgical, cruel. The mansion's guards never saw it coming. One moment they were shadows at their posts, the next they were bodies collapsing under the silent flash of suppressed gunfire. By the time the alarms blared, it was already too late. Smoke choked the corridors, glass shattered like gunfire, and the sound of boots filled the night. Mayo woke to chaos, the acrid smell of burning, shouts, the thunder of explosions that seemed to tear the world apart. She called Ryan's name, but he was gone. Somewhere beyond the smoke and the shouting, he was fighting back, his men falling one by one. She stumbled through the hall, half blind with fear, trying to find him. The next thing she felt was the cold press of a hand against her mouth, the sting of chloroform in her lungs, and then darkness. When she woke, the air was damp, metallic, laced with something rotten. The room was small and dimly lit by a single bulb that buzzed overhead. Her wrists were bound, her mouth dry, her head pounding from the drug. For a long moment she didn't move, just listened. Somewhere beyond the door, men spoke in low voices, the rhythm of their speech carrying the kind of confidence that came from victory. She remembered the attack, the screams, the flash of steel in the dark. Panic surged up her throat. "Ryan," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the sound. The door opened. The man who stepped inside was not a stranger. She recognized him from a dinner months ago, a tall man with a wolfish grin and eyes that smiled without warmth. Elias Wu, Ryan's former lieutenant, the one who had disappeared after a failed coup 2 years back. Now he looked calmer, colder, the kind of calm that came from having nothing left to lose. "You're awake," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her. "Good. I want you clear-headed for this." "What do you want?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Justice," Elias said simply, leaning back. "And maybe a little redemption. But mostly I want Ryan Kong to bleed." He studied her face as if searching for something. "You think he's a good man, don't you? The savior of his city, the king who brought order where there was chaos." He laughed, low and bitter. "You have no idea what kind of monster you've been sleeping beside." Mayo's heart thudded painfully. "You're lying." Elias smiled faintly, then nodded toward the door. "Bring it in." 2 men entered, dragging a metal case. They set it on the floor and opened it. Inside were files, photographs, documents, video stills. Elias picked up one photo and held it out. "This is what your king did." Mayo stared at the image. A warehouse. Bodies lined up on the floor, their faces blurred with blood. She recognized the logo on the wall. It was one of Ryan's shipping fronts. "That was the first purge," Elias said. "His way of consolidating power. Anyone who opposed him, anyone who wouldn't swear loyalty, was erased. Entire families." She shook her head. "You forged this. You." He tossed another photo at her feet. Then another. Each one more terrible than the last. "This isn't propaganda, Mayo. This is record. You think empires are built on business deals and handshakes? No, they're built on blood. His empire stands because he made it so. He wanted control, and he took it, no matter who burned along the way." Mayo pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop." Elias leaned forward, his voice softening. He's not what you think. The man you love, the one who tells you he's protecting you from the world, he's the very thing he claims to fight. You deserve to know what he's done in your name." Hours passed in that dim room. Elias left her with the files, the truth spilling out page by page, detail by detail. She read until her vision blurred, until she could barely breathe. Each revelation was a knife. The money that had bought her comfort came from extortion. The peace Ryan had promised the city came from corpses buried in unmarked graves. Every smile he'd given her was painted over the ashes of someone else's life. When the door creaked open again, she didn't look up. "You've made your point," she said quietly. Elias crouched beside her. "No, he made my point for me. You were just the last one who didn't see it." She turned toward him, eyes red and shining. "Why show me this? Why not just kill me?" "Because he'll come for you," Elias said, his voice almost gentle now. "And when he does, he'll bring the storm with him. I want you to see what that storm really is. I want you to see what kind of man kills to save the woman he already destroyed." Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon. Back at the Kong mansion, the survivors of the attack moved like ghosts. Ryan's arm was bandaged, his face cut, his eyes hollow. He had killed 3 men with his own hands that night. The smell of smoke still clung to his skin. Every instinct in him screamed for war, but beneath the fury was something colder, fear. Mayo was gone. He stood in the ruins of his home, staring at the blood on the floor, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of what he'd built pressing down on him. Every empire drew its enemies. He'd known that. He just hadn't expected the enemy to strike where he was weakest. When word reached him of who was behind it, something inside him shifted. Elias Wu, the ghost he thought he'd buried long ago. Ryan's men waited for orders, but he said nothing. He simply walked to the balcony, lit a cigarette, and watched the city below, his city, spread like a kingdom built on fire. The smoke curled around him, the taste of ash bitter on his tongue. He thought of Mayo, of her laughter, her trust. He thought of the things she didn't know, the things he'd done to keep her safe. Now those secrets were no longer buried. In a dark cell across the city, Mayo lay awake, the sound of rain dripping through the cracks above her. She replayed the stories, the photos, the names of the dead. The man she loved was not a savior. He was a ruler of shadows, and yet the thought that cut deepest was that she still wanted to see him, still wanted him to come for her, because even monsters can love. Outside, the storm broke, and the city drowned in rain. Elias's men moved through the night, preparing for the next phase. The war that Ryan had spent years keeping at bay was about to erupt again. And in its heart, between the blood and the lies, was a woman who finally saw the truth of the world she had stepped into. The enemy had struck, but the greater battle was only beginning. The night soul burned gold under the city lights. Ryan's world turned black. The moment he saw the blood-stained photo, the one showing Mayo bound, her eyes wide with terror, something inside him snapped. The controlled, cold-blooded businessman vanished. In his place rose the man who once ruled the underworld with an iron hand. No more hiding behind contracts and polished marble offices. Tonight, the King of Shadows would reclaim what was his. The rescue unfolded like a storm. One command from Ryan and the city moved. Black cars without plates glided through alleys. Men with gloved hands and silent steps breached doors. The air crackled with the electricity of vengeance. Every rival who had dared touch her would learn what it meant to defy him. From a rooftop overlooking the rusted warehouse district, Ryan watched the chaos he had unleashed. gunfire flared below. His men moved like ghosts, efficient and merciless. Inside, Mayo shivered in the corner of a dark room. Her wrists ached, her breath shallow. She didn't know how many days it had been. Time had dissolved into fear and silence. The door creaked, and she flinched, expecting more cruelty. Instead, a shadow filled the doorway, tall and still. Then came the sound of his voice, low, steady, terrifyingly calm. Mayo. Her name broke something inside her. When his hands cut her bonds, she collapsed into him. For a long moment, neither spoke. His shirt was damp with blood, some of it his, some not. But his hold was steady, unshaking. She could feel the pounding of his heart, the storm of rage and relief beneath his calm mask. Outside, the night howled. By dawn, the warehouse was nothing but ruin. Ryan stood amid the wreckage, his men dispersing into the fog, his enemies silenced. The world would call it a power play, a warning. Only he knew it was something else, a declaration. No one took what belonged to him. When they returned to his penthouse, the city stretched far below like a sea of light. The silence between them was fragile, thick with everything unspoken. Mayo looked at the man who had torn apart half the city for her, the same man who had lied, manipulated, and controlled every inch of her life. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered. He turned, his eyes colder than the skyline. "They would have killed you." "That's not what I mean. You shouldn't have become this again." Ryan's jaw tightened. "This is who I am, Mayo." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was more than the monster the world feared. But looking at him now, the way his presence filled the room, the faint trace of blood on his cuff, she wasn't sure anymore. The line between savior and captor blurred. Days passed. The world whispered of the incident, of the CEO who had quietly crushed an entire syndicate. Ryan returned to his empire, colder, sharper, unreachable. He didn't ask for her forgiveness. He didn't need it. But every time his gaze found hers, there was something in it. Something raw and dangerous, like a wound that refused to heal. Mayo tried to leave once, packed a small bag, crept to the elevator in the middle of the night. But the moment she saw the black cars waiting outside, she knew freedom would not be simple. Ryan had built walls around her, not with locks, but with protection, with power so absolute it felt like a cage made of silk. When he found her standing by the door, trembling with the weight of her own confusion, he didn't shout. He only said, "You walk out that door, you'll never come back. Not because I'll stop you, but because the world out there doesn't forgive. You'll have nothing, no home, no safety. I've seen what poverty does. I've lived it." "And if I stay?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Then you'll be my queen." The word lingered between them like smoke. Queen. It sounded beautiful, terrifying. The world at her feet, but at a cost of her soul. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of love without conditions, of honesty without danger. That girl felt like a ghost now, drifting somewhere far away. Just when Mayo began to believe she could choose, when she almost convinced herself she might find peace in the luxury and chaos of his world, the past came for her. It began with a call, her mother's trembling voice on the other end, speaking in riddles. Then came the message, delivered by a stranger at the gate, an envelope thick with photos and a single note. "We know who he really is. Pay us, or the world will too." Ryan's expression didn't change when she handed him the letter, but the silence that followed was sharper than any scream. He read every line, then looked up slowly, his eyes dark as thunderclouds. "They knew," he said. "Your family. They knew everything." Mayo shook her head, but his voice sliced through her denial. "They orchestrated your eviction. They knew I'd find you. You were never an accident, Mayo. You were the bait." The room spun. She clutched the table to steady herself, nausea rising. "No, that's not true. They wouldn't." But even as she said it, she remembered the strange timing of her landlord's anger, her mother's sudden silence, the way her brother had asked, "Do you ever see that CEO on the news?" It all clicked together like cruel puzzle pieces. Ryan tossed the letter onto the table. "They played you. They used you to get to me." The words hit harder than any blow. Her family, her blood, had used her as a pawn. Everything that had happened since the night she lost her home, the chaos, the love, the danger, it had all begun with their betrayal. Mayo sank onto the couch, her mind splintering. She thought of her mother's gentle hands, her father's quiet pride. Could they have really done this? For money? For power? Ryan crouched before her, his voice low, almost tender. "You don't have to protect them. I'll handle it." She looked up, her eyes searching his. "Handle it? You mean destroy them?" "If that's what it takes." Her heart twisted. In that instant, she saw the two paths laid bare before her, each leading to a different version of herself. One was the queen, the woman who would stand beside him, wrapped in diamonds and darkness, feared and untouchable. The other was the captive who chose freedom, even if it meant walking barefoot into a world that had forgotten her. "Mayo," Ryan said softly, "you already know what you are. You just have to admit it." The city pulsed outside, alive and indifferent. She rose slowly, her breath trembling. For the first time, she didn't look at him as the man who saved her, or the man who broke her. She looked at him as the reflection of everything she could become. "I don't want to be your queen," she said finally. "Not if it means losing what's left of me." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then something in his gaze faltered. A flicker of pain, quickly buried. He nodded once, a silent surrender that felt heavier than violence. "You'll go back to nothing," he said quietly. "Then maybe that's where I'll find myself again." She walked to the elevator without looking back. The doors closed with a soft hiss, and Ryan stood alone, surrounded by a kingdom built on shadows. He had won every war, but lost the only thing that made him human. Outside, the dawn broke over Seoul, washing the city in pale light. Mayo stepped into the cold morning air, her breath visible, her future uncertain. Behind her, the empire of the Mafia king gleamed like a golden cage. Ahead of her stretched the unknown, empty, fragile, but hers. And somewhere, deep within both of them, the same truth echoed in silence. To love a monster was to become one, or to leave him and learn how to live again. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family, and if you felt that twist in your chest, if you're still thinking about Ryan and Mayo right now, then don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe, smash that like button. And if you've made it this far, tell me, what would you choose? Power or freedom? Would you stand beside the devil who'd burn the world for you? Or walk away with nothing but your soul intact? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Tell me where you're watching from, because I want to know who's out there, feeling this story the way I wrote it, and stay with me, because what's coming next will make this chapter look like the calm before the storm. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. See you in the next one.